Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security.
Longtime listeners of the Cognitive Crucible know that we are interested in discussing all aspects of the information environment and then placing these discussions into a national security context. Several weeks ago, for example, we had Dr. Greg Treverton on the podcast, who discussed ways the intelligence community surfaces global trends of national security interest. Well, today's discussion is about a different kind of trend analysis, consumer trends. Today's discussion will give you a glimpse into the world of bleeding-edge consumer intelligence gathering using the most sophisticated tools and expertise available for distilling key trends, understanding emerging engagement technologies, and potential disruptors, all for the purpose of posturing or aligning brands with observable cultural and social trends and communicating effectively with consumers. Like nation states, global brands are feeling the pressure to observe, orient, and adapt to the rapidly evolving information environment. My guest today is a leading authority on cultural and social zeitgeist shifts and micro trends which affect brands. Emma Chiu leads Wunderman Thompson Intelligence, the agency's in-house futures and innovation think tank. Our wide-ranging discussion touches on trends that she, along with her team at Wanderman Thompson, have uncovered, which are rocking the marketplace and the global competition for attention, such as corporate anxiety and urgency, as COVID has accelerated trends, especially in the digital and technology spaces. Implications regarding collective power of the people and shifting trust, how brands are aligning relative to purpose in emerging social values signals, employee activism, which is forging new employer-employee expectations and corporate responses, grappling with Gen Z information consumption and how platforms like TikTok and Clubhouse are taking some brands by surprise, shifting from me to we with branding together initiatives where brands collaborate on global or societal change, and future-proofing with value-based marketing. Emma Chiu, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you, John. I'm excited to be here.
Could you tell our audience a little bit more about Wanderman Thompson generally and the intelligence group that you lead?
Of course. So Wunderman Thompson is a WPP agency. We are part creative, part consultancy, part technology company. And the agency offers a broad spectrum of capabilities for our global clients. We're a 20,000 strong team across 90 different markets. So there's a lot of smart minds operating across different disciplines at Wanderman Thompson. So amongst this huge organization, where does my team fit in? So my team is called Wanderman Thompson Intelligence, and it is the Futures Consumer Insight and Innovation Unit, which helps our clients plan long-term future-proof strategies. And we do this by charting emerging global trends, observe consumer change, and also spot innovation patterns across different disciplines and industries, and then translating these into insight for brands and clients.
I would imagine that you and your colleagues have a process for uncovering trends, which is both art and science. Could you please describe for us your team composition and also talk a bit about the approaches and methodologies that you use to compile your intelligence?
I like that reference you made to the way we work being a combination of art and science, because the way our team is made up is actually made up of a diverse backgrounds and experiences. So we have journalists, writers, creatives, designers, and neurologists as well. So I have someone in my team who works very closely with me who studied neuroscience. And I think what's interesting with having a diverse blend of expertise within our team is the way we approach research and insight, and the way we distill that information and interpret that allows us to blend data, analytics, as well as more innovative and broader creative observations, and bring all these forces together to create a more stronger, more compelling research and information. And what we do is what we often work on is, what does this mean? So we need to understand what's happening right now in order to understand what's going to happen next. So a lot of what we research and observe is the future. And it feels, I think often when I talk about the future, it always sounds something out there. But it's not about looking into a crystal ball. We can kind of wipe that away from our visualization. It's really about leveraging insight that we have now, observing consumer behaviors, observing any interesting cultural shifts, and also industry startups or innovation, and kind of trying to dive into where that change will be heading. There's a lot of nuggets of emerging trends that are happening on a global scale. What does this mean? How will people adopt this? Will they adopt it? And will it stand the test of time? So these are these are the types of questions we ask as we notice, there's interesting research, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot going on around the world. And it's all about distilling what's truly interesting and what truly will stand the test of time. And one thing I always go back to is a quote from the sci-fi author William Gibson. And he puts it quite eloquently, where he says, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed." And I love that quote because it really captures what my team does. So my team essentially is here to help distribute the future evenly so that we can understand it now in order to prepare ourselves for what's to happen next.
That is fascinating. We've had a couple of other discussions on the podcast with futurists. I suggest to our listeners to go back and listen to a podcast on threat casting with a gentleman named Brian David Johnson, or BDJ, with Arizona State. And also we had August Cole on the podcast, who is a fiction writer, but he uses he created a term called FIC-int, fictionalized intelligence, and so he has a methodology of looking into plausible techno futures and writing from that vantage. And it sounds like you guys could also be considered a futurist outfit, nested within Wunderman Thompson, and a different kind of applied futurism. Does that resonate with you?
Completely, yes. I've been called many things by different journalists, and futurists is one of them.
Yeah, well, that certainly seems to fit. So you produce, at least annually, a report called the Future 100, and we will have a link to this area of the Wanderman Thompson website in the show notes. It's a freely available resource. It's a beautifully put together report. And your 2021 report, which just came out actually quite recently, I think within the last month, has many fascinating trends, and I flipped through it over the last few days, and here are just a couple. There's 100 of them, but here's a few that I just found particularly interesting. There's entries for the future of live events and data sustainability, upending deep fakes, remaking Silicon Valley, protecting Generation Alpha, TikTok advertising, and e-wallet wars. So, and there's like 90 more. But could you please tell our audience a little bit more about this product? Why do you do it? And also, why do you make it freely available? There's all kinds of market intelligence and effort put into this, and yet you make it freely available to the world. Could you take that in whatever direction you think is productive?
Yes, of course. I do get asked that quite a lot. Why is it free? You're giving away a lot. I guess perhaps we should put it behind a paywall. So going back to why we produce it in the first place. So the Future 100 was launched in 2014 by Lucy Green, who was leading the team back then. And it's designed to be a guide for originally for our clients, but also for brands, marketeers, and individuals to guide them throughout the year ahead. So what's to come when it comes to consumer behaviors, any sector change or innovation. And the idea is to provide nuggets of inspiration, but also to observe similarities that your industry or your line of work may be working on, or look at opportunities that are out there as well. So I think there's a combination of how this project could be used in a variety of different ways. And I have, strategists often use it in a way where it helps them carve out more long-term strategic thinking for their clients that they're working with. And a lot of marketeers use it for thought leadership. So any interesting talking points. And another thing which I think is quite a good marketing tool is, as trend forecasters, we love meshing words or creating new words that could potentially be very catchy. And it's quite often because we're not just blending words or creating new words for the sake of it, but it's also because we're observing new spaces and new happenings, and a word for it doesn't quite exist yet. So we're trying to think of what that could be called, and eventually it will adopt and become something that's more catchy. So I think that's also quite a fun way for marketers and thought leaders to apply the report and how they could use it in terms of interesting new opportunities, interesting new talking points, and also inspiration that could lead to new projects or new ways of thinking for their company as well. And the report is divided into 10 sectors. So the sectors we cover include brands and innovation, technology, but also includes finance, retail, beauty, food and drink. So quite often, I think a lot of people tend to be drawn to the sector that they're already working in. But one thing I highly recommend, and what I find, as someone who works on a report, there's so much cross-pollination between these different sectors. As we're working on them, we're kind of thinking, this could fit under technology, but it also fits under health and finance. And I think there's so much of this cross-pollination happening that there's a lot of learnings from other sectors that, whoever's reading it should be looking at as well.
Right. Yeah. I can imagine that a clever analysis could take your report, and perhaps you guys already do something like this internally, but having like statistical linkages between some of the topic areas, provides additional intelligence above and beyond the discrete topic areas themselves.
That's right. Yeah. And I think the way we ground our trends are definitely in substance. There's 100 of them, and it can be a blend of data, expert interviews, or industry examples. So these are all areas that we latch onto to create our trends.
Perhaps we could talk about some specifics from recent trend observations from the current report and maybe last year's report. I would love to get your hot take or your your headline findings from recent trends from the current report, and maybe compare it to last year's report, and what are the trends that seem to be holding up, and what are some trends that maybe fizzled out or you're less satisfied with now. But could you talk about some of your key findings?
Sure. As we put these 100 micro trends together, I often observe macro themes that are happening as well. So sort of larger shifts that's moving us in these directions. And one area that I've been observing is brand purpose. So values and purpose for brands and consumers alike is more important than ever. And I think it's definitely shifted from a nice to have to a must. And there's a sense of urgency that's rallying behind brand purpose now. And we're seeing this in different examples within the report, including employee activists. So this trend looks at expectations for brands actually moving beyond the products and services that they sell to consumers, but also looking within the organization, what's happening internally. And employees are highlighting and offering more transparency of how the organization is run. And therefore, it's influencing also consumers in how they think about that brand too. And we also have, in connection to brand purpose, another example, which is ethical scoreboard. And this is a measurement of how brand values are. So essentially, we're starting to notice there are new trackers in place to measure the amount of good a brand is doing. And I wonder if later in the future, as we start having more trackers like this to measure the good of a company, whether the way we base our thoughts or the way we buy into a brand will also consider this ethical scoreboard as well. And just one last trend on brand purpose that we also mention is called branding together. And this is a play on words with banding together. And we've noticed there's a cultural shift from me to we in society, but this has also extended to brands, as we notice a lot of businesses, largely connected to COVID-19 in 2020, really looking to set aside competition for collaboration. And the purpose of it is to create bigger change, be it for the environment, public health, or societal healing. The need to create big societal change needs to happen not individually, but as a combined force. So I think brands are starting to do this as well. And that's definitely an interesting observation we've made. So just to compare it to stuff that's happened in 2020, what we've learned in 2020, or what we observed in 2020, was there was a lot of interest in individuals, but also connecting to a sense of community. And this want to connect to a sense of community and this uprising in activism, what does it mean? And, moving in, kind of accelerating a year on, this activism or these, need for change or for, brands and organizations to do better is turning into more tangible and actionable requests. So rather than people wanting it, brands and organizations are having to apply this. And of course, for big organizations, it's not something they can just do so easily. And so laying out long-term plans that consumers can kind of go back to and hold them up against and say, hey, you said by 25 you're going to do this, you're going to be carbon neutral, you're going to be whatever. There's just something to hold them accountable for. And I think this is becoming more and more important. And there's brands can't and organizations can't hide behind that would be nice for us to have. It's kind of had this sense of urgency now, like we must do this.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. I actually did key in on one of those items that you mentioned just a moment ago, the branding together, where I suppose two brands that on the face of it might not seem to have too much in common, but they get together in some kind of a campaign to message along those lines that you were just describing, that we have a common future vision of pick some topic to rally around, like it could be a clean climate type of an outlook, and so brands can get together and message together about something like that, even though the brands remain separate.
That's right. And I think some prominent examples from that are a lot of pharmaceutical and research companies teaming up to help create a vaccine for COVID-19. And I think, the fact that they're combining different skill sets, technologies, equipment has sped up the process of creating vaccines. So I think this is a good example of how combining forces can create something for the greater good.
Yeah. And also what I'm hearing you articulate is that consumer sentiment is more important than it's ever been. I would assume that consumer sentiment has been important for an awfully long time, but it seems like the feedback loop into branding is stronger than it's ever been, or the feedback loop is open and being received by brands in a way that is new. And all of this is probably fueled by the technology of the information age that we all enjoy.
That's right. And I think there's been a huge shift in consumer trust as well. So I think there was a time when there was a lot of trust in government, which has shifted. And then there was a lot of trust in brands, which has shifted. And we're at a stage where it's kind of all up for grabs. And this sense of where shall I put my trust, whether it's my peers, like-minded people, my local community, or it could be a big organization, or it could be the government. So I think this is still very open. But as you said, we're living in an era where information is out there for us to research. There's no hiding behind anything anymore. If we want to find out whether your company has, is upholding the values that you talk about, we can find that out, like people can find that out. So there's a lot of power in the people right now, and brands are noticing that, and they need to align with these values that they talk about and align with the values that people want today. And quite honestly, it's kind of like a win-win situation, because these values that people want are for the greater good. They are wanting a more sustainable future. They are wanting companies to be more ethical, inclusive, and they're wanting a healthier lifestyle for the future generation. So I think there's a lot of drive in future generation wants and needs, to create I don't know, I guess we're talking about the new normal quite a lot now, but rather than it being like this new normal that we're creating, I think we're looking for a future that we all want to live in, that's optimistic and desirable. So I think we're in the we're building the foundations of what it could be, and brands are listening, and organizations are listening. And I think this is a really exciting time for everyone to participate in.
You mentioned COVID a moment ago, and so you guys put these reports out annually, but last year you actually felt the need to put out a supplementary report, primarily, I think, due to COVID. Could you talk about some of your observations related to COVID and how this is affecting the branding ecosystem?
Yeah, last year was quite the year, I have to say. And, after putting out 100 trends, 2 months later, COVID happened, and it made us, and I think COVID has, put everyone into reflection mode. It made us reflect on what we put out, the accuracy of it. We're going through huge change right now. What does this mean? And what does this mean for the future? And one thing we observed is, yes, there's huge change happening, and industries have been rocked hugely. And there's still a sense of uncertainty with when things are going to, kind of subside or be different. And it made us look back at the trends that we put out. And one thing that we noticed, which thankfully, we realized that actually, larger long-term consumer behavior doesn't change that much. So I think a lot of the broader topics of consumer behavior, wherever it's the demand for ethical brands or more sustainable approach to the way we live, these broader strokes of being and desires by people are still very much in place. So perhaps in the early months, when we were in a lot of uncertainty of what a global pandemic would mean to us, our behaviors changed, and we were acting in ways which we wouldn't normally. But as things settle down, we calm down and we think about what we want, and we adapt as human beings. So these adapted behaviors are essentially what we've been talking about in the first report we put out. But the sort of second report latches on to certain trends that we've already identified, and actually notice that they've not only happened, they've accelerated. So there was a lot of acceleration of trends in 2020. A lot of things that we talked about in the report that we put out earlier in the year already happened, and at lightning speed. And there were things that we forecast, so we don't only plan for the year ahead, we plan for, next 5 years, 10 years. We're observing longer term changes. One thing we've noticed is a lot of changes, especially in the digital and technology space, that we've forecast for 4 to 5 years time. It's happening right now. And that's something really interesting for us as forecasters. And I think, this year, 2021, more so than any other year, the need to know what's going to happen next feels far more important. And I've noticed a lot of colleagues, clients, even friends, asking about what are the key broad sweeping topics that they need to be aware of in the upcoming year. And I've not had that many people asking me. Previously they would just kind of, do their own research and look through the report. But this year there is that sense of urgency, and we're starting to see this manifest in a lot of trends that we talk about too.
That last point you made is really interesting. I think perhaps it's I I wouldn't, given your line of work, I wouldn't call it anecdotal. I would say that perhaps that's additional evidence of, this arms race that we're in, and I mean that from a national security perspective, but also from a competitive business perspective. There's an arms race for information, and being able to do something insightful with that information. In your case, it's global micro trends for brands, but continuing to analyze and surface, the very latest trends which are meaningful, and doing it again and again and again, and feeding that information back to your clients. There's, I guess, an increasing demand for something like real-time market intelligence that's actionable. Would you say that that's fair?
Absolutely. So I often see this report as a great companion to the upcoming year, and definitely something used for inspiration. But we also include, after every trend, why it's interesting. And I think the why it's interesting section, it really resonates with our readers, because that is something that's a little bit more tangible and actionable as well. So, of course, it's great to kind of see all this inspiration and innovation that's out there, that's happening. But what can companies do with this? What can organizations do with this information? And this is kind of like where we internally ladder up into the next stage of turning this into actionable plans. So I think the first thing is understanding what's happening and what's out there. And the next step is then, what do we do with this information? How is it relevant to our company? And how do we best resonate with our existing audience, but also reach out to the new audience? So there's a lot of questions around the younger generation, Gen Zs, because they're coming of age, they're joining the workforce, they're getting to a point in their lives where they are essentially adults. The oldest are 24 years old, and yet it feels like there's still a mystery to a lot of brands that we work with. And this is where our team comes in. We want to educate and provide and arm our clients with knowledge around different consumer groups, different behaviors, but also how they can reach out and resonate with them. How can they keep them as loyal future consumers as well? So these are types of things that we constantly work on and constantly think about. And the report is kind of just the very beginning stages of all of this.
I'm really interested to get your thoughts on the competition for attention. You can look at the branding marketplace in lots of different ways, I would assume. One of those ways is trying to acquire and maintain the attention of your consumer base, and that's a competition. And it's the same kind of thing in the national security space. It's a competition for global nation state branding, if you will. But today there is so much information coming at us, and so many outlets. There's audience fragmentation into micro segments. Again, I would imagine that this has always been a major part of marketing and influence, but it just seems like it's possibly more acute than ever these days. And I would assume that many of your clients are experiencing this same kind of anxiety, I guess, and they're looking to you guys to help solve this problem. Could you share some of your thoughts along these lines?
Yeah, that's a really good point, John. I don't know if we have reached the peak of information at the moment, but you're right, there is a lot of information out there. There's a lot of different channels. There's a lot of different things competing for our attention. And we're operating as human beings in a way where we're skimming, we're digesting content with half an eye, shall I say?
Mm-hmm.
And we're not fully immersing ourselves in any one thing. And this, you're right, this is high anxiety for brands that we work with, because they want people's attention. There's an attention economy out there, and it's definitely something that we look at as forecasters, by understanding what people are interested in. So what platforms are they looking at? Why are they looking at that? Is it because it's providing short form information? Is it because it's providing different type of information that's more visual? So these are types of areas that we kind of dive into as forecasters to really just understand people and their behaviors and what's interesting for people. And then how can brands using that information do something about it? And connected to that, we also look at new platforms that come out. So TikTok or Clubhouse, these are types of areas that for us is very interesting, because it's taken off in a way where a lot of companies are like, what's that? And
I would imagine, yeah.
And for us, we want to come armed knowing what it is, why people are interested in it, how TikTok, for example, has migrated from like a music platform to a space which is promoting new products, new launches. There's a trend in our Future 100 report this year called finfluencers. So how influencers are leveraging platforms like TikTok, so reaching out to the younger generation who tend to be on this platform, Generation Z, and providing them with financial advice. And these are the types of platforms and spaces that brands should be looking at in order to reach different types of audiences, because we're not always going to be on Facebook, or we're not always going to be on the similar types of channels that we've been looking at, and these are shape-shifting all the time.
Right.
And I think there's a stat which I don't know off the top of my head exactly, but by 2050 the number of people on Facebook who are dead will surpass the number of people on Facebook who are living. And I think that is staggering to kind of understand how a new platform can exist and be really relevant and then change completely. So these are types of things that we spot along the way. And it's important to find new channels and mediums for brands to leverage in order to reach and communicate information to the audience that they want to speak to.
Wow. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned TikTok. As I was doing some prep for our discussion, I went through the most recent report, and I just did a word find within the report, and I looked up TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Google and a couple of other really big outfits, Amazon maybe, but TikTok had the most mentions in the report of all of those well-known platforms that I just mentioned, and I guess that really speaks to some of the direction that that brands are wanting to understand so that they can effectively exploit it. And also, I tend to watch YouTube videos, and something that I've noticed, getting back to this competition for attention, is YouTube and other platforms have advertisements that play either at the beginning or sometime during the middle of the video, and on YouTube, at least, there is the ability to skip an advertisement after it's played for maybe 5 seconds or something like that, but you don't have to watch the whole 30-second thing. But I would imagine that advertisers are now having to be extremely thoughtful about the first 5 seconds of their ad, right? Because, lots of people, I would imagine, skip the ad if it's possible to do so. So that means you have to really pack a punch in the first couple of seconds in order to try to get your brand into people's brains and have it grab a hold there.
Completely. And what's also really important is knowing that different platforms or different channels need a different format of storytelling as well. As well as the point that you've made, that if your advert is going to exist within YouTube, the first 5 seconds is crucial. The same applies to the way you tell your story or package your story on, say, a TikTok or Instagram. And perhaps on Instagram, the post is going to behave very differently from an Instagram live or Instagram stories. So I think the traditional thought of, hey, we could just create one idea and just roll it out across and force it into these different formats, it doesn't quite work in the same way anymore, because quite frankly, people will notice that and it doesn't work. It doesn't just retrofit into a different platform. So actually approaching the same idea, but telling it in different ways across these different channels is very important for how brands are reaching to these audiences today. And storytelling is a huge part of it. And I think, the Future 100 essentially is, micro stories of what's happening in the upcoming year, shall we say, and then how we apply that to whether it's a campaign or brand, an overall brand strategy. Again, that's something that we need to think on a more deeper level.
Yeah, that must be a real challenge for large brands that have consumers that span microgroups to make sure that their overall suite of marketing efforts across groups still has a foundational message which is complementary across those groups. Do you get what I'm saying? It's like you can't say two completely different things to different groups of people in the information age, because your hypocrisy or your conflicting message is going to be found out. So you have to figure out a way to curate your message so that it resonates with different groups of people, yet at the same time have a harmonious overall brand strategy. That sounds like it's hard to do.
That's right, John. Yeah, it does make sense what you're saying. It's essentially, this is where the overall brand strategy or the brand mission is so important, because that is going to ground all these other messaging or all these other stories or all these campaigns that are going to roll out or product launches that are going to roll out. And if that is flawed in any way, then whatever you roll out alongside that will also have issues and problems. So our mission as part of my team is to help plot out long-term plans and to understand long-term consequences. Therefore, creating a brand strategy for the clients that we work with, helping them create a strategy that has a long-lasting effect. And essentially, we use the words future-proof quite a lot. And the idea is to help future-proof them from our observations, and help apply that and protect their messaging, their overarching messaging. So you're right. I think it is very important to have a very concrete and message for the clients.
So I'd like to switch gears slightly. And the way I've always thought about marketing and commercials, I've always thought about it in very linear terms, right? A organization has a product to sell. They talk about the benefits of that product, like, my shampoo is great. It'll make your hair smell good. It'll make your hair, glossy and smooth. Go buy my shampoo, right? That's a very linear type of approach. But you guys also help your clients think about ways to get into their consumers' minds in ways that are a lot more subtle than that. Could you pick up on that and take that in whatever direction you think is productive?
Yes, I think this connects to something we talked about a little bit earlier when we're looking to compete for people's attention. And I think there's a linear format of communicating products or services, which still exists, and there's still a huge need for that. But we're at an age where there's so much out there. Being a master in storytelling and taking people's attention away from what they think we could be telling them, and then almost surprising them with, this brand is behind this message, or this brand is behind this story, and it connects with them because they're also, for whatever reason, they're also participating in this campaign or this cause. And I think there's a huge area that we're investing in terms of creativity, which is carving out new formats of storytelling. And this, again, goes hand in hand with trying to grab someone's attention. But on top of that, we also want to surprise them and to make them think about the brand or our clients differently as well. So, the sort of linear approach makes the brand feel very one-dimensional, very transactional. But there are also ways where we want to be a lot more, deeper, more substantial, and to show a more 360 approach to what this brand is also doing, because there's a lot going on behind a lot of the brands that we work with. They are connected to a lot of exciting causes, which, isn't necessarily on the forefront of products or services that they're selling. And we think there's great opportunities in either through advertising or through other storytelling formats to convey this to audiences. And, at this time when, especially when a brand so well, so for example, our team worked with Coca-Cola, and one thing that we've been talking about in 2021 is people are looking for optimism, because 2020, quite frankly, was quite the opposite of that. But now we're looking ahead and we're looking at the future. And so we latched on to that sentiment of optimism and thinking how a brand could help, infuse a sense of optimism in people. So our team changed the packaging. They kind of changed the statements that's listed on the cans, and they took off the logo. And I think what's interesting there is Coca-Cola is such a recognizable, has such recognizable branding already. It doesn't really need the logo to kind of push it or, suggest further. And so we're kind of playing with these different elements. And it's, again, goes back to what I've been talking about, is latching on to what people want, which is this sense of optimism in 2021. One part of that, seeing what a brand can do, how that can be wrapped into, say, communication. So whether it's through packaging or through the commercials, and then putting that idea out there for people to take it as they will, because I think we're also at a time when we want a sense of personalization. So there were a lot of cans that had different types of messaging out there, and the idea was it would be relevant for different types of people. And these optimistic messages that we kind of put out there will apply to the masses in different ways and be interpreted in different ways. So that's like one example of how we've internally been connecting our type of thinking with consumer and messaging.
Yeah, I can imagine that it is a very intricate project to be able to weave in, I guess, value-based messaging into a brand. But I can also see how when it's done well, it really works. For example, I'm partial to the Marine Corps. I'm a retired Marine, but I know that you guys have a long-standing relationship with the Marine Corps, and some of your work that you've done for the advertising portion of Marine Corps recruiting has been heralded as some really amazing brand marketing that really sticks, not only with people who are in the target market to actually join the Marines, young people, but also people who are in the Marine Corps, former Marines, and even people who have no affiliation with the Marine Corps other than being Americans. And so the commercials that you guys have done for the Marine Corps have tended to really resonate across the spectrum of stakeholders. Oh, and even to the rest of the world, because your commercials convey very effectively that the Marine Corps is a exquisite fighting force that is part of America's package. And so having that kind of a message that resonates so broadly is a real trick, but it's also I think maybe an example of this kind of marketing, which is not linear, and the commercials even have that surprise element to them, at least sometimes. Like the first 30 seconds or so of the commercial, it might not be especially obvious, who is the sponsor of this, but as the commercial unfolds, it becomes increasingly clear, like, oh wow, this is one of those Marine Corps commercials. And so you guys probably do this for a number of your clients.
We do, and I think the Marine Corps is a great example of understanding the times and the consumer. I'm sure if we put all the commercials, recruitment commercials together and put it in a sort of chronological way, you get a sense of how consumer behavior has evolved over that time. And more recently, we're targeting a new generation of young potentials to join the Marine Corps, and what they're looking for and their sort of motivation and values may be very different from what people were looking for 10, 20 years ago. And so therefore the foundations of the Marine Corps and what they'll be doing is perhaps not so different from 10, 20 years ago, but the way we communicate that needs to speak to this new generation. And it's such a diverse group at the Marine Corps of what they offer in terms of job prospects. It's crucial to highlight the right promising potentials to candidates that may be interested in jobs at the Marine Corps. So I think you're right. It's of its time, but also speaks to the current generation.
Well, I can't think of a better place to end than talking about the Marine Corps. I could talk to you about this kind of stuff for hours. This is fascinating, but let's conclude. And Emma Chiu, thank you so much for being on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure to be here.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.